Hi everyone, Duke Neil here. So, continuing with the theme of videos that my fellow members of the Order of Chivalry and others have been putting up, I thought I would make a contribution while we're all in isolation. What I want to talk about today is fighting mentality, I guess, or warrior mindset, which is a separate thing. I've taken some notes to bring into this conversation, but I think ultimately this would work better as a conversation or an interview for anyone who is interested in having some kind of Zoom get together or something after this, if you're in fact interested in my ideas. For those of you who don't know me, I am a Duke, a Knight, have been the King of Lockhart 3 times, won some fighter auctions and various tournaments around this kingdom, and had the joy and pleasure of training with some people at Penzic and at Raglan Fair as well. So I've seen a bit of the SCA world and done a little bit in my time. I will caveat though that these are my concepts and my philosophies, but I believe that they've led to my success. I guess under all of this is the training that other people are putting up. So we're getting a lot of training videos now that talk about drills, how to address certain weapon threats, body mechanics, the underpinning training that you need to bring to a fight. I call them swordsman skills, but axeman, glavesman, whatever you want to say, they're the drills on the weapon system that keep you confident and competent with that weapon system. I come from an advantage where I have both a military and a law enforcement background, and so my approach to fights and fighting come down to having that grounded knowledge and solid drills that your body automatically falls back on when you're in a fight. Because when you're in a fight, you don't have time to think of techniques and drills. You need drills to happen as second nature while you're analysing the threat in front of you and you're addressing the threat in front of you. So what I'd like to talk about, I guess, is the warrior swordsman mentality a little bit. I guess you could also call it a martial arts versus a fighter kind of mindset. So let me be clear, I think that SCA combat, armoured combat particularly, it also applies to rapier combat and it applies to archery as well. And I believe that it is not fighting, but it's a combat sport, and it's not a martial art. Now, some controversial. Some people think that it is one of those things or the other, but I think it's a combat sport. It is not fighting. We are not fighting for our life, but we're replicating fighting in a sports environment. And I don't believe it's a martial art because there is a range of theories and opinions as to what is the correct way. And the other reason I don't believe it's a martial art is because it has an endpoint or an outcome. So, having done all three types of concepts in my time, the SCA combat has an agreed set of rules that are frequently modified and updated. There's mandatory safety equipment, and there is a winner. A fight, in reality, is when a person who is angry or has a motive and means to do you violence in order to hurt you to meet their objective. And that's why I say that we do a combat sport. We're not fighting. Nobody wishes anybody else ill intent when they step into the tournament field or the war field. The purpose of us being there is having fun and to fight, but not fight. There's no motive to do each other violence in that space. I guess then if we talk about martial arts, and martial arts I attribute to the swordsman way in the SCA as well. They're great, I think, if your end game is some kind of philosophical path to enlightenment through strict discipline and adherence to a regime. And during that, you'll attain some very specific physical strength or fitness and specific range of motion that comes with your adherence to that discipline. Martial arts always have their own rules and safety, but their esoteric nature means their end game is merely the mastery of those techniques. The end game is very rarely a competition, and the end game is very rarely for fighting. Martial arts gives you a specific set of skills that may or may not be applicable to SCA combat and may or may not be applicable in an actual fight. Now, I guess the contrast is there, to be a successful SCA fighter, you still need to go through some drills. You need to have those drills patterned down. But if I can give you an analogy of modern warfare, and I'm not talking about the video game, I'm talking about what soldiers do. The ability to conduct drills while chaos is occurring around you and stay engaged in the fight, to get their weapon system up and working when their weapon system fails, whether that's running out of ammunition or something else happens, they fall back to a drill, to a body mechanic that just happens, and they get back in the fight while they're looking at everything and addressing the threat around them in the middle of chaos. That's how I would differentiate what drills we do to what drills a martial artist does. So to me, SCA armoured combat, rapier combat, archery combat is a sport, and through it we seek victory. We display our prowess and we obtain measurable success. At any point in time, there is a champion and a set hierarchy. It is a sport. It is not designed to provide some form of esoteric enlightenment or fulfillment, although there are some elements of that when becoming a member of the chivalry. SCA fighting on the whole is designed to be enjoyable and designed to be fun. Because I think it's a sport, it's not reenactment. We conduct our sport in a reenactment environment, and we strive to have certain things that are period in ways, and some people pursue period manuals. That's fine. However, at the end of the day on the war field, nobody's coming along and picking up the dead people because there are none. At the end of the day, nobody is stomping on people's heads, using daggers through eye slots, cutting people's legs off, etc., etc. It is not reenactment. It's a sport, and it's meant for enjoyment. And that's why I like it. Now, what I want to talk about, I think, is a little bit about the warrior mentality, and that is your comfort level to commit controlled violence. And I say controlled violence. Now, for some people, a violent reaction is innate, and sometimes we see it in the SCA where people, what we commonly refer to as red mist. It's when rage overtakes reasoning, and people continue into a fight at the expense of the rules, at the expense of their honour, and at the expense of safety, because they have lost control. Controlled violence is what we do in the SCA. We have our set of rules. To have the warrior mindset, you need to, one, be comfortable with violence. And you need to be comfortable both committing it and receiving it. It's a violent exchange. We are having a fight. we're engaging in combat. It is mutual combat, but I want to hit you and not let you hit me. So, to get to that point, you have to be comfortable with being hit. Nobody likes being hit, but you need to accept, I guess, your fate that you will be hit. If I take you back, 10 years into my fighting career back in the day, so I would go out at training and front up against a Duke Sir, and with me with 1 and a bit years of fighting under my belt. And I've lost the fight before I've even started because I don't know what's going to happen. Because I don't know what's going to happen, I panic a little bit. My heart rate and my respiration increase involuntarily even though I've done nothing, because I think I'm going to get hurt because I'm going to be hit in a squidgy spot by someone who's been doing this for a long time really well. Once you accept that you're going to get hit in a squidgy spot and it's going to leave a bruise, but it's really not that big a deal, you start to be able to enter the fight in a more controlled way. Now, for some people, there is an ability to respond in that with an escalation of controlled violence. I feel I have that ability. I gradually... let me correct that. I can immediately escalate my level of violence and immediacy of action, but I try and do it in a controlled way where this isn't working, so I'm going to this, or here is the opportunity and I'm going to this. Some people can't because they've not trained that and they haven't been in an environment where they've been able to explore that. So that kind of takes me to a point where I want to talk about, in training, finding your safe space to work out your level of violence. Now, if we do take a martial arts approach to this, and I'll use jiu-jitsu as an example, or judo similarly, it's getting into those brutal positions and the arm bar's getting pulled on but knowing you can tap out. We have that in the SCA. Tap out is hold. Hold. You stop. If people don't stop, they're uncontrolled, and that needs to be addressed because this is controlled violence that we're participating in. So we create a safe space at training. That is, we're going to do whatever we're doing, and you find the experienced partner that you want to work with, and then you, as the experienced partner yourself, you give that person the opportunity to explore what they're going to do. Now, I've had conversations with people over time, particularly in Lockhart, where they think that's unchivalric. It's unchivalric to explore your rage. It's unchivalric to let your adrenaline get up. It's unchivalric to escalate violence in any kind of way. Now, I contest that theory in a number of ways, and you can look at it either from a modern perspective or a period perspective. So if we look at it from a period perspective, and I kind of had this conversation about brutality versus chivalry. What use is a knight to their crown if they can't go and kill the enemy of the state? All right. Later period, modern knights of our current period, sure, because people are knighted for their contribution to music and contributions to charity and whatnot. And as time goes on in later period, you see those more genteel ways becoming knightable qualities. But in theory, in period, a knight is a warrior. Particularly, in early period, it was the requirement of the knight to go out and defend their kingdom, defend their crown, and to do that, they had to commit violence, and it was nasty and dirty and extreme. The chivalric part then comes in that person walks off that field after committing that violence in a controlled or uncontrolled way in period, but in our way, in a controlled way, and then they conduct themselves like a noble. There's parallels with that with modern society. It's what we expect of our modern military officers. We expect our military officers, particularly those in special forces or infantry roles, to be able to go out and commit violence in the defence of their nation, and then walk into an officer's mess and conduct themselves like a lady or a gentleman in that space. So let's not pretend that violence and warrior mindset is not part of what we're about and what we're doing. Some people will contest that. Some people will be far more genteel than me, and that's fine. But I would suggest that those people who are truly successful within the SCA combat environment, either knowingly or unknowingly, have a comfort with violence, have a controlled escalation of force, and have an immediacy of action that they can undertake to get there. Now, how do you achieve that in your training? So I'm fortunate that I achieve that through a range of mundane occupational activities. I've had plenty of training and experience where I've been in violent situations and had to commit violence within a very defined legal rule set, and that's fine. Now, how do people who don't have exposure to that do that? Well, there's a number of ways. Firstly, you need to watch fighting. I always tell my squires and my students to watch MMA, and the reason I want them to watch MMA is for a number of reasons, including footwork, which I'll get back to in a minute. But MMA is the closest other combat sport, I believe, that replicates real fighting. There is a level of brutality there. People bleed, they get hurt, bones get broken. It's as close to reality as you can sort of get for a combat sport. And at the end of the match, they shake hands and give each other a hug. It is a proper mutual competition, and there is mutual respect there. And when the fight is over, they shake hands and give each other a hug. And I think there's a lot of parallels with SCA combat with that. By watching UFC, MMA, whatever you want to call it, you're getting familiar with it. You're getting, I guess, into the environment that's out of the genteel environment and into the rough and guts of it, into the mud, if you will. So that's one way to do it. Some people don't realise that they are comfortable with violence and have that comfort until I start asking them questions about it. And I ask them questions about when they've been in a fight. And when I mean when they've been in a fight, I mean a pub fight, or when they've been mugged, or a schoolyard brawl in their teens, or something like that. Now, for some people, those things have never happened. Great, perfect. You're going to need to go down the MMA path and expose yourself to some controlled levels of violence to become comfortable with it, to understand it. But for those who have been in other fights, I guess it's remembering what that was like. It's searching deep within yourself to consider what you did in that moment, what physical reactions you had in that time frame, and are those physical reactions good? Did they enhance your ability to fight in the moment, or did they degrade your ability to fight? So I'm talking about, target fixation. Were you so fixated on what happens, you forgot everything that was happening there? If that's what happened, obviously that's going to be a problem in an SCA war scenario, because you need to train that out of you. So you need to analyze that and work it out. It's funny, for those on the path to chivalry, and some people think this way, it gets a little bit controversial, but a lot of people say that a knight should be good with whatever weapon system you put in their hand, and I believe that's true to varying degrees. The weapon system should be almost irrelevant to the fight, unless, of course, the one weapon defeats the other weapon automatically, i.e. a 10-foot pike and a dagger. Like, that's not going to work. It might. Good luck. Any weapon form a knight should be at least competent with, because they're fighting. The weapon in their hand shouldn't matter. And one of my esteemed colleagues, who happens to be the King of Lockhart right now, once said, would I want that person next to me with a bar stool in a bar? And his point is valid and irrelevant. What he's saying is this person a warrior? Can they perform in a combat situation regardless of the weapon form that you put in their hand? It's a valid argument, and I like it, and I've stuck with that ever since I heard it, because I think it's very true. And that's coming from a mundane perspective, I guess, where, if I'm actually in a fight and I'm having a mundane fight, then it's probably a fight for my life, and it doesn't matter what I have in my hand, whether that be the tools that I'm provided with in a mundane occupational circumstance, or whether it's a rock, a bottle, or a bar stool. I have to be competent with that, but that comes from never having picked that up. It comes from the warrior mindset, having a conditioned body and some drills. One thing I'll talk about now, just before I finish off, I guess, is I want to talk about opponent appreciation. Basically, I try and analyze my opponent prior to any fight I ever have with that opponent. Now, that might be me watching them fight other people. It might be watching videos of them fight. And sometimes all I can do is watch how they walk onto the field and what their weapon system is. Regardless, what I'm doing is I'm creating a tactic. The overall strategy, obviously, is to win, but strategy informs tactics, and I need to come up with a tactic immediately so that I can respond in a controlled manner, seize the immediacy of action moment, and perform my controlled violence in order to win the fight. So I try and analyze what my opponent does, and then work out either how I will take that away from them, or I'll exploit that as a gap. Now, if I go back to the MMA references, if any of you have seen Ronda Rousey's fighting, right? She was an Olympic bronze medalist in judo, first UFC women's world champion, won that 2 or 3 times, and then lost it in a series of fights. Now, the longer that she was in the MMA, she declined in her fights. Now, if you watch the opponents that she lost to, they spent considerable time analysing her fighting ability. So if you look at her first significant loss, which was against Holly Holmes, Ronda Rousey is a judoka. Judo and jiu-jitsu are her two skills. She had won a series of fights in 20 seconds, 39 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever, by taking the fight to ground. She knew that what she could do best was take people to ground, where she, as a Olympic bronze medalist judoka, had the advantage in the fight. If you watch her fight with Holly Holmes, who is primarily a kickboxer, she did not let Rousey get anywhere near her during that fight. She knew that what Rousey wanted to do was get close and take the fight to ground. So Holly Holmes just kept backing out. She just left. Now, you can think about how that applies to SCA combat. If I'm fighting a Glavesman, I want to get in. Like, I want to be the Rousey in the situation and get right in there and take that space for them to operate away from them. And you'll see Glavesman, by the same concept, try and create space, running backwards, moving offline, all of that. But the reason I do that opponent analysis is to make the fight tactically unfair. Because if you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck, and you're not applying a warrior mindset to what's going on, because you've gone into a fight with no intention to be victorious. Anyway, I'll leave that there because I'm up to nearly 27 minutes, and that's a lot of data and information to unpack, and I think we can unpack it more if anyone has some specific questions, and I'd be happy to answer those. And I know that some people have been doing some interviews and some other online Zoom chats and whatnot, and I am more than happy to have those conversations. Most of the fighting training that comes out of me is this sort of training with only very specific and very practical body mechanics or moves that come to overcome some kind of problem or weakness that I see in somebody's fighting. One of those things is footwork, and that's a whole separate conversation, which I will talk about another time. Otherwise, thanks for sticking with me for the best part of a half an hour. I hope that's helpful, and happy to talk to all of you all more. See you later, Lockhart.